Hello everyone, my name is Anisitola and I welcome all of you to my thought piece video. Today I'll be sharing my thoughts on a topic, schedule management, from project planning chapter of our BAB 905 textbook called Project Management. This topic really stood out to me because I've seen firsthand how important timelines are in both academic group work and real world business settings. After reading the textbook, going through professors' lectures, and doing a bit of my own research, I realized just how central schedule management is to a project success. It's not just about setting a deadline and hoping everyone sticks to it. It's a structured, strategic process that requires planning, tracking, and constant adjustment. What I've come to understand is that schedule management is really about controlling time, which is one of the biggest constraints in any project. When people say time is money, it absolutely applies here. If you miss one key task or forget to factor in a dependency, your whole project can fall behind. And that delay often affects cost, resources, and even stakeholder satisfaction. From what I gathered, there are five key parts to schedule management, and I'll walk through each one with how I interpreted them. First is activity definition. This is where everything begins. Before you can manage time, you need to define exactly what work needs to be done. I now understand that this usually happens after the work breakdown structure is created. Each deliverable is broken down into smaller tasks and manageable tasks, almost like creating a detailed to do list for the entire project. What stood out to me is that being too vague at this stage can lead to scope creep or missed deadlines later on the project. So, clarity here is very critical. Activity sequencing. Once the tasks are defined, the next step is figuring out what order they needs to be completed in. Some tasks are dependent on others. For example, you can't run financial analysis until the data is clean and validated. These are called dependencies, and identifying them early helps avoid bottlenecks. I learned that tools like network diagrams or precedent diagrams are used to map out these relationships visually. I found this fascinating because it shows how project management is not just planning, it's also part logic and flow. Next is activity estimation. Next, we estimate the time required for each task. This part made me appreciate how difficult it is to be accurate. According to the textbook, we can use historical data, expert judgment, or techniques like PERT, program evaluation and review technique, which uses optimistic, pessimistic, and most likely estimates to give a weighted average. What I understood here is that it's not just about picking a number, it's about being realistic and building in room for uncertainty. Fourth is schedule development. Now that we know that what the tasks are, in what order they happen, and how long each task takes, we build the actual project schedule. This was the most interesting part to me. Tools like Gantt chart, which I've seen in school projects, help visualize the timeline. But there is also something called critical path method, CPM, which identifies the longest sequence of dependent tasks that determines the minimum project duration. I found this method really insightful because if a task on the critical path is delayed, the whole project is delayed. That really highlighted for me where the pressure points are in any project. Fifth is schedule control. This is the part where things get real. Even the best schedules don't go exactly as planned. Team members get pulled to other tasks, vendors deliver late, or tasks take longer than expected. Schedule control is about monitoring the progress of the project, comparing it to the baseline schedule, and then making adjustment to stay on track. It also involves updating stakeholders, reallocating resources, or fast tracking certain tasks. What I really took away here is that flexibility and responsiveness are just as important as the initial plan. So, overall, what I've come to realize is that schedule management is not static, it's a living, breathing process that needs attention throughout the project. It plays a huge role in balancing the triple constraint time, cost, and scope. Before this, I thought of scheduling as just setting due dates, but now I understand it's a detailed discipline that involves planning, strategy, and constant communication. Whether you are managing a large construction project or a simple school assignment, how you manage your time will often determine your success. Now, let me share some of my personal experiences that really shaped how I think about schedule management. Let me take you back to my time as a co-op student at KT Partners LLP. It was a small to medium-sized accounting firm where I worked on several review and audit engagements. There was one particular file I worked on that really made me appreciate the importance of schedule management, or basically scheduling. We had a client that needed their year-end review completed within a tight deadline because they had to submit financial statements to their lenders or the banks. Everything seemed straightforward at first. We split up the task. I was doing bank reconciliations and supporting working papers, while others handled inventory and sales testing. But as we moved through the file, things started to pile up because it was a busy season. I finished up my part, but then the manager requested a few changes that made redoing some reconciliations. At the same time, the person doing inventory testing ran into issues verifying some balances, which pushed back everything. What I realized in that moment is that we hadn't built in any buffer time and we didn't really have a clear visual schedule showing who was dependent on what. Everyone was working, but we weren't aligned on sequencing. That meant when one part slipped, everything slightly fell and the rest started falling like dominoes. In the end, we did get the file submitted on time, but just barely. It came with a lot of stress, last minute rushing, and late nights that could have been avoided if we had mapped out a better schedule from the beginning, one that accounted for reviews, rework, and dependencies. Another moment that stand out happened to me during my summer internship at Demac Incorporated. It is an electric vehicle wholesaler and retailer. I was part of the accounting team, and one of my main responsibilities was entering vendor invoices and doing bank reconciliations in QuickBooks. The team was small and the workload was steady, but what became apparently really quickly was that we didn't have a shared schedule or task list. We were all just told what to do verbally or over through the email. Some days I would be working on an invoice entry and someone else would need access to the same file to check the payments. Or I would be halfway through a reconciliation and when I would find out that the supporting documents hadn't been uploaded yet by another staff member. At first, I thought maybe I was just too slow, but I eventually realized it was more of a workflow coordination issue. Tasks were overlapping, and people didn't know who was doing what or when. It wasn't that we lacked effort; it was just that we lacked a simple system to plan the sequence of our task. Even something as basic as whiteboard with dates and initials or a shared Google Sheet could have helped. That experience really opened my eyes to how schedule management applies even in small office environments, not just raw large scale projects. I'm definitely in favor of schedule management, but I don't think it always needs to be formal or complicated. It should be scaled to fit the size and complexity of the project. For smaller student projects or simple client files, even a Google Sheet with start end dates and a few dependencies can do the job. For larger corporations and engagements, especially when multiple departments or people are involved, tools like MS Project or Gantt chart make a lot of sense. One common mistake I've noticed is over planning, where teams spend too much time creating the perfect schedule but then don't leave room for flexibility. I think the best approach is somewhere in the middle, structured but adaptable. To wrap up, schedule management might not be the flashiest part of project planning, but it's definitely one of the most essential. It helps avoid surprises, ensures accountability, and keeps everyone focused on the end goal. From my own experience, I've learned that whether you are working on a school project or an accounting engagement, having a clear timeline and tracking it regularly makes a huge difference. And I thank all of you for listening to my thought piece, and I hope this helps show why schedule management deserves more attention than it usually gets. Thank you for listening. Have a good day.